Good afternoon. Wow, I might feel like an astronaut opening the door of the ISS for the first time. Scary and amazed. So nice to meet you. Matteo Ainardi, I'm a strategy consultant. And as strategy consultant, my daily job is helping people, organizations in taking decisions. And in taking decisions often in complex and uncertain environment like the space industry today, which is going through a very big transformation, as you all know. In my company, Arthur D. Little is the oldest strategy consultancy firm, founded in 1886. As a special link with the space sector, as we have been supported in NASA in the Apollo program, and we've been working on multiple large space missions in the past. And right now, we are working a lot in the space sector on all the topics, constellation, space transportation, and everything which is transforming the space industry right now. My company loves the space sector, and we love the link between technology, innovation, and strategy. And as part of this passion, more or less 1 year ago, we discussed with a few colleagues to start an exercise that was basically to spend some time together and to think about what could be the space industry in 2040. It is quite an ambitious exercise, so we took some time to think about it, to do some analysis, to do some work, to share our view with multiple decision makers in the sector, many very fruitful discussion. And so what I would like to do here in the next 10 to 15 minutes is to share with you the status of this work as of today, which is still is a work which is ongoing, but I would like to share with you our preliminary thoughts as food for thought, and I hope they will provide some good facts and material to help you connecting more and to thinking about the space sector. So, as in our job, we usually tend to be very disciplined and to follow methodologies. And so here, what we applied is a methodology that we call strategy in uncertain environment. So we structured our thinking across 5 steps. In the first step, we did a picture, as of today, that we call the flow of funds. So we looked at the space industry, and basically we tried to address this question: where is the money coming from, and where is the money going in the space sector? And so we looked at all the players in the space industry and trying to map where the money was going and what was the profitability of each player. Then what we did was to look at what are the key trends, what are the evolutions, and how these trends are reshaping and changing the industry. What are the key uncertainties? And based on all that, what could be the scenarios, the stretch scenarios, that could emerge and that could shape the space sector in the longer term? And finally, for each of these scenarios, what we did was to assess how is the value being redistributed based on the way in which the space sector evolved. So we assessed 18 trends, but before jumping into that, let me just pause one moment and speak about the first step, the picture of the current situation in the flow fund in the space sector. So there is money coming a lot from governmental institutions, space agencies, ministries of defense. There is money coming from the commercial markets, especially from the telecommunication sector. But there is an important change that has happened over the last 5 years, is the money from private funding. So the money coming from private investors investing in the space sector. This is, to give an idea, is between 3 and 4 billion per year being invested in the space sector. And this 3 to 4 billion per year, which is half of the budget of the European Space Agency every year, is money which is 90% in the US, 2/3 in the launcher sector, and in the rest is constellation. And this money enjoys a degree of freedom, I would say, and agility that is much higher than what we can find in large space agency or in large governmental space program. So this is a big disruption that is happening, is that this money, which is like a big space agency and a big space program, is flowing to the market and is accelerated innovation and disruption. So when we look at the 18 trends, I could spend 2 hours going through them, and which is not good with respect to the agenda of this the wonderful space con. But let me just, there are many trends that are driving demand and technology. But I think what is important are two dimensions that we use to filter these trends. The first question that we ask ourselves when looking at them was, what is the impact of this trend of the industry? And this is what you see on the vertical side of the matrix. So on the top part, you have the trends that are the most impactful. And what is the likelihood of these trends to materialize? And this is what you see on the horizontal part. So on the right, you have the more uncertain trends and evolution, and on the left, you are the most certain one. So basically, there are two things, two sides of the matrix that matter the most. The top left, which is the force of gravity driving the space sector, and the top right, which is what is the uncertainty, what is the big and important, impactful uncertainty driving the space sector. So if I speak about the force of gravity, so what is certain and what is impactful, I would mention just one, which is important and which summarizes everything, is the fact that I believe that the space sector will increase and keep increasing in importance over the next 2 decades in connecting people, in synchronizing systems, in tracking assets, in observing the planet, so all the applications that we know. And on top of that, space environment will become even more important as the frontier environment to pursue all the most ambitious endeavor in terms of scientific and technological development of humanity. This is really the frontier where you can make the most breakthrough and most ambitious innovation programs. So then if we move to the 4 bubbles in the top right box, so this is what we call the turning points. So these are the evolutions which are uncertain but impactful. We have these 4 ones. Yeah. And we tried, when looking at them, we tried to put them on a time scale. It's a tricky exercise. We will not be exact, but we tried to think what will come first, what will come later in time. So the first one is what we call mass adoption. And this one, we believe it's quite linked to the constellations, to the LEO constellations which are being deployed. So the LEO constellation, the deployment of LEO constellation is a certitude. There are thousands already Starlink satellites in the sky, and the OneWeb is deploying. So this, no doubt about it, and no doubt about the change that constellation has delivered and has implemented across the industry from the manufacturing and cost reduction point of view. There is no doubt about it. The big question ahead that will be probably answered between now and 2025 is, will this constellation find a breakthrough market? So will they be able to expand the market for space and become economically viable player that will expand commercially the space sector? Or will they incrementally improve the space communication, the satellite communication industry, but without making a breakthrough and without becoming sustainable and large-scale business? And this will have an impact on the scale of the commercial space sector, obviously. The second aspect is the commercial space station, and is linked to the transition from the ESS to what will come next. What will come next after the end of the ESS, towards the end of this decade? Will that be a multitude of commercially funded and operated private stations? Or will that be an institutional space station, mainly institutional space station with the limited private involvement? And again, here we'll have different order of magnitude in the size that market could have. The third one, and we touched upon it this morning in the round table, is the exploitation of in-space resources. And this, we position that towards 2030. Why 2030? Because we believe that the efforts that are being put right now in the moon exploration will be would say, a sort of feasibility study or validation of the feasibility of whether we can economically and I would say technically and economically it will be feasible in a technical and economical viable way to extract and exploit resources from celestial bodies and from the moon. And these, basically the two stretch option that we see there is that there will be some discoveries and there will be some ways economically feasible to exploit them. And in that case, there will be an industry that will be put in place on the moon and in cislunar environment to exploit that discovery and to exploit and transport that discovery with private involvement? Or will that be, the answer will be that it will not be economically viable or feasible to exploit that resources, and therefore it will remain a scientific endeavor, and the focus will probably move to Mars as the next frontier after the moon. And finally, a trend that can come quite quickly and is accelerating and that can unfold quite quickly is what we call the weaponization. It is a little bit our Star Wars event that could happen. Here what we see is that military, over the last 5 years, has accelerated its interest in space. And the military organizations around the world have organized to deal with space as a theater of potential war, and they've been procuring capabilities to develop their ability to act in space. And in this weaponization scenario, we see an increase and acceleration in the investment in technology development for the military that can also benefit the civil sector, obviously. But we see the risk that at some point there will be an accident that can derail and that can make the space sector a very risky and hostile place for having some commercial activity and some commercial venture. So this can be a very showstopper at some point for the commercial space sector development if there is some military war or accident in space. So, based on that work and on the analysis made around these trends, we wanted to identify 4, I would say, illustrative and stretch scenarios. These are on purpose stretch ones to I would say, pull the space sector to the extreme and to illustrate some extreme situation that could happen in the development on the space sector. And we structured our thinking around 2 dimensions. Again, it's a little bit our way of thinking in a matrix. Like on one side, we thought, what could be the sources of funding for the space sector compared to today? Will they be more commercial, or will they be more governmental, even more than today? And on the other end, we thought about what will be the structure of the industry. Are we going into an integrated and very consolidated industry, or are we going into a fragmented, very fragmented and distributed industry in space? And based on that, we have 4 scenarios. The first one, that we call the commercial breakthrough, is the scenario in which a few companies, 2, 3 companies around the world, develop and master some disruptive technologies that allow them to take a broader and broader control of the space ecosystem. I think that all of you have some example in mind on the other side of the ocean of companies that are taking this approach today, also supported by their government. The second scenario that we see, what we call the hyperproductivity, is a scenario of commercial development of the space sector, in which the space sector, thanks to very intense standardization and cost reduction efforts, becomes seamlessly integrated with terrestrial infrastructure. Let's imagine in telecom, in Earth observation, for example, where space data becomes a continuous flow with the terrestrial network. And this creates a much wider demand for the space sector and a much wider market for space. So a growth thanks to standardization and integration and removing the boundary between the space technology and the terrestrial technology. In that scenario, we see a value chain which is segmented in specialists, building standardized blocks, terminals, payloads, satellites, that will maximize the scale and will work together in order to build these new next generation systems. Our third scenario, what we call the critical sovereign capabilities, is our, I would say, the scenario towards a higher degree of militarization and a Star Wars scenario. So here is where the governments accelerate on their procurement of military capabilities and of sovereign capabilities. They spend more in technology innovation, and we have an industry which is consolidated on a country-by-country basis or on a space power by space power basis to fulfill the need of the domestic demand for the government. And finally, we have the extensive international cooperation. This is the scenario where we come back and we de-escalate the tension, the geopolitical tension, and we are able to come back to a collaboration like the ESS program has been in the 90s. So here we're speaking about large, ambitious programs like the ESS was, conducted in a multilateral collaboration, very strong collaboration between the different countries, to the benefit of humanity with a supply chain for the space sector which is distributed around the different countries of the world, and working together as Lego bricks to build something very big and very ambitious for humanity. So I could spend other 2 hours talking about these scenarios, but rather than doing that, I would like to conclude by thinking about the position of Europe in all that fast changing and in that changing environment. And what we see is that Europe has been a very strong innovator over the last decades in space, and Europe has been able to build, both in the governmental and in the commercial domain, champions and leading positions in services, in infrastructure, and also in scientific experiments and successes. But today, the ecosystem is changing fast. It's changing fast and it's changing big, with a very large amount of funding being allocated, focalized in a very agile way on a few very specific priorities. And Europe today, we see it too much fragmented on too many topics which are crucial for space, and too much slow in adapting and in acting in that fast-changing environment. Therefore, we think that it's urgent for Europe to align on a common roadmap and on a common set of priority and vision for space to be relevant in the space of 2040. So this is the story that I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matteo, for that presentation. I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions, if anyone would like to share anything from the audience. Okay, you've mentioned, I have one, as usual. We had, I think yesterday was it that we had the signing of the agreement between the now 3 European agencies doing space, and you've just mentioned in your speech that Europe is quite fragmented. Would this, do you see in this agreement, do you see a pace forward towards more clarity within, or more cooperation between the future agencies, or you still see that this agreement between EUSPA, ESA, and the EU Commission is not changing it?
No, it's absolutely a good step forward. The question is that we need to accelerate even more, I would say, in the convergence between the European agencies and between the national countries on topics like space exploration, for example. That is a topic that will come tomorrow, but very, very, very quickly will come as a strategic topic. We cannot act in a fragmented way. We cannot have countries taking the approach of, as Europe, taking the approach of going with one, I would say, framework, and others taking a completely different approach. I'm thinking about, for example, having in Europe a mix of countries going for Artemis or not for Artemis, or taking different positions on laws and on regulations. This is something that, as Europe, we cannot afford, because otherwise we are too small and will not be relevant in the space.
I agree. Thank you so much, Matteo, for your time and for your presentation today. If I'm not mistaken, if you have any other questions for Matteo, don't hesitate to also catch him during the coffee break at the New Space Forum, which we're still going to get there in one more speakers before our break. Thank you so much, Matteo. You can give this back to my colleagues. A big applause for Matteo. Thank you so much.